Next item is the proposed plan change 1 Woolston risk management area, to which I just referred. David, are you coming down or? Yep. Okay. Jamie, would you like to introduce this item?
Just briefly then, it's quite a good segue from the public forum presentation then, I suppose, talking about district plan and being unable to make changes to that currently. In essence, this is really just a noting paper to ensure that when we do have control of our district plan back, that we've got work underway to make this plan change, and this will be the first one. Don't know if staff want to talk a bit more about the detail with it. Over to you, if you like.
Go for it.
Just at a high level, though.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Yes, there's as you're aware, there's the sunset clause in the plan in Chapter 4, which is set for the 31st of March 2019. This covers the risk management overlay in Woolston over the 2 bulk fuel terminals in the area. The overlay, the sunset clause was put in the plan by the independent hearings panel at the time, before they realised that the order in council would be extended by the Greater Christchurch Regeneration Act. The idea of the overlay and the sunset clause is to ensure that sensitive activities can't get too close to the existing fuel terminals. The reason the sunset clause specifically was put in, because at the time of the independent hearings panel being held, the quantitative risk analyses that the oil companies do to define the scope of the overlay were approaching the end of their lifespan. So the independent hearings panel gave them a couple of years to go ahead and refresh those QRAs, as they're called, and then come back to the council. And the idea being then there probably would be a plan change just to refresh the overlay, assuming the overlay would stay, but it would probably change just because the modelling techniques change over time. The oil companies did that work and came back to council probably about a year ago and said, we're now ready to update the overlay in the plan. And basically that update would mean that a number of properties, it's all industrial zoned, industrial general, industrial heavy, but a number of properties within that area would no longer need to be under the overlay, but some other properties would need to go under the new overlay. That's what the modelling was showing. So, unfortunately, obviously, given the order in council, we weren't in a position to do a plan change there. So we've been working with the oil companies to draw up the plan change as far as we possibly can in this sort of interim stage, so we could move quite quickly before the 31st of March. The hope being earlier in the year that really with quite a fast-moving plan change process, that if the OIC had come off early, we could perhaps still do a plan change in time for the 31st of March. As time's gone on, that's become impossible now. We have worked with other partners, such as the Department of Prime Minister and the Cabinet, to see if there were any options available under the Greater Christchurch Regeneration Act. But there wasn't a natural fit with this process for using a Section 71 process or any other non-RMA mechanism, because it really is a resource management issue. So it's left us in a situation whereby we've continued to prepare the plan change. So we are ready to notify that plan change as soon as the OIC is revoked. And because there are a number of potentially new affected parties going forward, we want to go through a thorough Schedule 1 plan change process, which gives everybody the opportunity to understand what's going on, be consulted upon it, and go work through a plan change in the standard mechanism, really, which could take 6, 12, 18 months, depending on how easily the process goes and how the consultation goes. At the same time as doing that, though, our real focus is on the one specific rule that drops away, related to the overlay, that makes any sensitive uses within the overlay non-complying. So what we've done, working with our legal team, is said that we'd probably kind of approach this with a 2-track approach of a standard plan change to do what needs to be done, which is to refresh the overlays in the plan, but at the same time applying to the Environment Court for an order to bring a rule forward in the plan, to make a rule operative from the point of notification. And that would be a single rule within the proposed plan change, which would basically continue to make any use within the overlay non-complying, and then you continue to go through the rest of the plan change process to actually go through the whole process of what the overlays will look like. But in the interim, it stops the gap or at least reduces the gap from the sunset clause expiring and a new rule coming in. It's realistically, I think in our view, in officer's view, there's not a massive risk of arising from a gap in the rules. The likelihood of sensitive activities going into the area is quite low, as I say, it's all zoned industrial. And industrial heavy zones have got pretty strict rules which would make most sensitive uses discretionary or non-complying, need resource consents. There is a slight gap potentially in the plan that allows preschools to be set up as a permitted activity in the industrial general zone if they're more than 100 metres away from an industrial heavy zone. That covers a very small area of where the overlay the overlays currently are. So after the 31st of March, there's a small area of industrial land that could be exposed to applications for preschool coming in and no resource consent being triggered, which is sort of the worst case scenario. And this is quite a big concern to the oil companies involved. So they are looking to eradicate that risk, really, or to at least minimise it. And that's why we think the Environment Court approach, given our limited options with the OIC, is the best way forward. So we went to Regulatory Performance Committee to outline this early on, so we're in a position to move as fast as possible when the OIC is revoked.
Just two questions. One is that have you had what's it called, the QRA peer reviewed?
Yes, we have.
Yeah, good.
Yep.
And secondly, could you do some advance engagement with the affected properties so that they can see in advance of the notification that they will be caught with this change? I mean, I agree with you that it's not a high risk, but I always think that sometimes the consequences justify action being taken anyway, even though it's not a high risk.
Absolutely, and it's also, I mean, if there was no OIC in place, it would be standard practice for a plan change for us to do some pre-notification consultation anyway to start alerting the community. In the recent, over the last few months, given that the OIC is in place, we didn't want to look too preemptive. Council going out talking about a plan change when we're not
but we know that we're getting the right
exactly. Yeah, where we're at now. So yes, we've started to put together a plan to do some early engagement, which will probably be in January. We could actually go out and maybe first and foremost probably a letter drop to the affected parties, but also some drop-in sessions.
Well, and that's also reminded me that have you briefed the local community board?
We did, yes. Yeah, we went to Linwood Heathcote in October.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Yanni.
Thank you, and thank you for the work you're doing on this. I think it is a contrast between the previous deputation where they're wanting work to be done, which hasn't started, and the work that you've done, which has started, which I think is really good. But I was just wondering in terms of the QRA, because we had a briefing at the community board, but we haven't had the QRA briefed to us, and we haven't had the peer review briefed. Is there a process by which those two, both the QRA and the peer review, can be sort of explained to people?
Absolutely. We've spoken to the oil companies and the representatives and the firms that have put together the QRAs, and they are happy to come and present to council or to do a briefing on the work that goes into that and how it works, because the QRAs create an overall line, but yes, within that obviously the sort of degrees of risk within there, and that sort of, as I think you mentioned at the
cycleway goes
exactly the different kind of uses in there, so they can talk a little bit more about the detail, and they're happy to come and do that. I think we have just practically not managed to find a time for a.
So how similar is this similar to what happened in Littleton in terms of the QRAs were done by the fuel companies? Is that kind of the normal practice?
I wasn't involved in the Littleton one, sorry, so.
Okay. Yeah. I think what's really important is the community have confidence in the QRAs that aren't being done to support the fuel companies. They're actually being done on, to actually look at the risk. And then the second question I had was just, so when you look at the map on page, sorry, I'll just find the page 12, the little orange lines are the key lines, right, of the impact. So you've talked about sensitive activities being sort of prohibit or non-compliant, so they need a consent. Would that include residential?
Yes, residential would need a consent.
So at the moment, people can just build residential in here, but they need a consent.
Yes.
And the QRA takes into account the fact that there is residential units within the boundaries.
Well, the underlying zoning would require the resource consents.
Sorry, I'm just trying to understand, like, my understanding of, like, QRAs previously is it's quite a different score if it's someone just passing through versus someone living in an area 24/7. So you
Yes.
get quite different outcomes based on the type of use. But I don't know if you're aware, but there's been some mixed use development in this hazard zone.
Yeah.
And I'm just trying to kind of understand what it means for them or how we work that.
It is only, I guess, a matter for consideration for the consents planners. The QRA's, the risk management area, the overlay, doesn't actually prohibit any form of development, but it is just a form of consideration, and that partly the location within that, the type of development and the kind of type of building that you're actually putting in will all be factors as well. So it's certainly possible to get a consent for different uses, but at least with the QRA being there, they have to go through that process that shows they've taken account of the QRA and the risks that's covering. So, as I say, it doesn't prohibit any form of development going in there.
So, but this will be all fully briefed to the community board so that they can get their head around it, and then made available to the public as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good, thank you. Would you like to move it, Yanni?
Yeah.
Seconded by Aaron. Yes, Glenn.
Oh, thank you. How did you spot this lacuna, this gap? I can't remember this kind of paper coming to council.
It's only because the independent hearings panel put a sunset clause on this provision.
Right.
So the sunset clause is next year. It's
Right.
the 31st of March.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the provision disappears.
Right.
That's how it's come to our attention,
Right.
and it's probably why you haven't seen it before.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that helpful?
Yep.
Yeah. Just wondering how many others there are.
No, we don't think there's any others.
No, we've looked.
Any other questions? I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Thank you very much. Thank you. Very